How to Hold a Grudge. It's probably no coincidence that as a crime writer, I'm interested in grudges. As any of you who've read Agatha Christie will know, some of the motives in her books are brilliant grudges. Murder on the Orient Express springs to mind, and my personal favourite grudge in Agatha Christie is the one in The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. Great, you all know what I'm talking about. So, how did I come to write a self-help book about grudges? Well, part of it is luck. When you've published as many books as I have, and you've been lucky enough to have them do well, that means that when you go to your publisher and say, I want to write, and then describe a weird, different thing, your publisher kind of goes, great, that sounds marvellous, while secretly thinking, I wish she'd just write her usual detective novels. But, you know, luckily, my publisher was very kind and tolerant. But the reason I wanted to write a self-help book in the first place is that I am addicted to self-help books. All those books like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle and, you know, Heal Your Inner Child and Find Your Inner Angel and all those books, love them. And I read them voraciously. If I'm not reading crime fiction, I'm reading self-help. But the problem I've always had with self-help books is that, you know, they all work, they're all perfectly logical, and they put forward these recipes for inner peace and happiness. But they're always things that I know I'd never be able to do. So, for example, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle says, basically, just don't let other people upset you. You know, accept that when other people behave badly, that's their issue, and carry on being peaceful and serene. But I was always noticing that when other people upset me, I would feel the urge to massively bitch about them for ages. And snarl a bit and say horrible, angry things about them. So I always just assumed that I was too bitchy for enlightenment. And in fact, the title of my self-help book was very nearly Too Bitchy for Enlightenment. Anyway, one day someone had annoyed me, and I was talking to my sister on the phone, and I said, do you know what, I think I'm going to write a book called How to Be a Doormat, because this person who'd annoyed me, I hadn't said anything, I'd just gone along with what they were doing, and I felt like a doormat. And my sister said, don't write a book called How to Be a Doormat. I said, why not? She said, because you're not a doormat. And any book with that title should be written by a genuine, bona fide doormat. I said, oh, all right, then I won't. She said, you know what you are, though? You're not a doormat, but what you are is someone who holds grudges like nobody I've ever known. And I said, what do you mean everyone holds grudges? And she said, well, firstly, that's not true. Lots of people just don't hold grudges, but even the ones who do hold the odd grudge, they don't do it in the detailed, analytical, almost forensic way that you do. So I started to think about whether this was true, and I jokingly said to my sister, well, maybe I should write a book called How to Hold a Grudge, haha. And then I went away and I thought, actually, why is it that I hold grudges? I've got millions of them, and I like them. They don't upset me. They don't make me feel angry or bitter. Once the initial annoyance from what I now call the grudge-sparking incident has passed, and all I've got left is the grudge story without the negative feelings, I actually love my grudge stories because I learn from them, and they're entertaining, and they kind of mark significant emotional landmarks in my life, and so I don't really want to give them up. But then I thought to myself, well, my sister is right. Some people don't have any grudges at all. My husband does not have a single grudge, and that's because he can't be bothered to remember anything. Eckhart Tolle would love my husband. I've never met anyone more in the now than my husband. Literally, you know, 2 hours before we have to leave and go to an airport for a 2-week holiday, he's sitting on the sofa like this. And I say, why aren't you packing? We've got to leave in 2 hours. And he goes, because I'm just sitting like this at the moment. So he doesn't hold grudges. And in fact, I hold his grudges as well as mine. when I was researching the book, I thought, right, as I've got busier and busier with, I write Poirot novels, I write psychological thrillers, now I'm moving into self-help. I have less and less time to do all the work that I need to do in. So I try and do my research very quickly. So for a self-help book, I thought, right, I'll have a study of one person, my husband. So when I was thinking about grudges, I kept saying to him, come on, tell me a grudge. I need to think of all the different types and categories of grudge. Tell me one of yours. And he'd be like, I don't think I've got any. So I'd go, well, what about your dad, who you've never forgiven for... And then I'd name the story, and he'd go, oh, yeah, that. I was like, yeah, but you forgot it. You'd literally forgotten it till I just reminded you. So I decided to write a self-help book called How to Hold a Grudge, partly because I thought I was an expert in it, and also partly because, and I couldn't believe this, there were no books about grudges. Not a single one. Because obviously, after the conversation with my sister, I went to Amazon and I thought, I'm going to find out why I hold grudges in such a dedicated way. There must be books called, what sort of personality type has a tendency to hold grudges. There was not a single book in any way on the specific subject of grudges. All I managed to find after extensive research were maybe 3 tiny journal articles in sort of academic psychology journals. And they were about very specific, case studies where a grudge was involved. And I thought, nobody has studied this. Nobody's written about it. Nobody has set themselves up as the grudge guru of our times. And I thought, well, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to be the grudge guru of the world. And I kind of hope that lots of people will join me, because as I've been telling people about this book, lots of people say, oh, I love my grudges. I've got millions of grudges. And it's a subject that we all are affected by, and it's such a central part of human experience. It's kind of crazy that there were no books about it. I really do find that weird when there's so many books about love and women who love too much and women who love too little and men who love the postman and just all kinds of, and anger. There's lots of books about anger. There's lots of books about forgiveness, but no books about grudges, even though psychologically it must be one of the most common human experiences. So then I thought, okay, what am I going to say about grudges? Obviously, the book is going to be kind of an anthology of all my favourite grudges, which it is. So it's got my top 10 grudge stories in reverse order. And I will tell you a couple of those grudge stories before we go tonight. But I thought, what do I want to say about grudges? And I realised that as well as wanting to analyse them and what sort of people are more likely to hold them and what the different categories of grudge are, how many different kinds of grudges are there. I wanted to do all that analytical stuff, but I also wanted to write a very definitely a self-help book arguing that holding grudges is good for you. And I really believe it is, and I'm going to very quickly tell you why. If you want to read more of the theory, it's in the book. Oh, and I will tell you this, which is very important. I've also started a podcast called How to Hold a Grudge. If you search for it on iTunes or Spotify, those are the only 2 places I've heard of where podcasts are, but I'm sure you'll know others. You should be able to find it. If you fancy subscribing to it, it's completely free. And you can leave a review saying whether you agree with my theories or not. But that would be great if some of you could listen to the podcast. So in the podcast, I talk about why I think grudges are good for you. And in the book, I do as well. And I'll put it really simply. Most people think that holding a grudge is the opposite of forgiving somebody. Right? That's what we're all told to think. Either you hold a grudge and you don't forgive, or you forgive and you don't hold any grudge. I don't believe this is the case at all. And the reason I know it's not the case is that all the people I hold grudges about, apart from the most recent one, I've got a new grudge from 2 days ago, and that person I have not forgiven and I'm still furious with. But all my other older grudges, I've forgiven those people totally. I would happily go out for a drink with them. I'd go out for a meal with them. I have nothing but affection for those people. Or, just I don't think about them at all if they're not a friend or family member. But I still have my grudge. And what that means is, let's say Fred is one of these people. So I love Fred, but I've still got a powerful grudge about him. What would happen would be if you said, hey, have you seen Fred recently? Immediately, a sort of grudge siren would go off in my mind. And I would think, Fred, grudge? Yeah, got a grudge about him. But it would be a reminder. It would be a reminder that there's something about Fred that I need to remember that still has a live relevance charge associated with it. Like, whenever Fred comes round to my house at the weekend, he gets so drunk that he's sick all over my Persian rug. In the week, Fred is lovely. And it's not his fault. He's got a drinking problem that, comes into effect at the weekend when he doesn't have to get up for work the next day. I don't dislike him. I don't hold it against him. I'm not angry. But my grudge story has a live relevance charge, and it will protect me by making sure that I remember, for example, that if I'm meeting Fred at the weekend, that I should meet him away from my house. Maybe somewhere with wooden floors that are easy to clean. But that if I'm seeing him on a Wednesday, then he can come round to my house. So that, to me, is what a grudge story is, and why we should all have grudges, because they have so many benefits. They protect us. If we know that Mary is absolutely fine apart from when we're ill, and when we're ill, Mary will go, oh, you look disgusting, don't come anywhere near me, you might be contagious. Well, you want to have that grudge about Mary so that you keep away from her when you're ill. Our grudges also give us a kind of symbolic, commemorative object, albeit an abstract object, that feels like a kind of private justice. If someone is really cruel to you on a personal level, well, you can't go down to the Old Bailey or the High Court and say, I want to prosecute this person for meanness. There's no official justice you can get. And it makes it harder to forgive them if you feel they've got away with it. They did that horrible thing. And if you just move on and forget it, well, it's like it never happened. It's like it didn't matter. If, on the other hand, you allow yourself to hold your grudge and you say, right, something happened. That thing that happened was grudge-worthy with a capital G. So then you immediately allow yourself to construct your grudge story and learn from it and keep it, and you're proud of your grudge story. It's kind of like a battle scar. Then you've got your commemorative justice object. You don't feel they've got away with it scot-free, because we don't get away with anything, right? If I'm in a bad mood and I'm rude to Bill when Bill's done nothing wrong, and I shouldn't be rude to Bill. It's my fault if I'm in a bad mood. And if I take it out on Bill, Bill will hold a grudge. I don't get away with that. Bill will forever think of me as someone who's mean when under pressure, right? So just by knowing that we've got that grudge about that person, we no longer feel they've got away with it. And weirdly, we then feel more able to forgive them. We also feel that by constructing our grudge story, we are no longer the victim to whom something has been done. We suddenly become an actor. We go off and create our grudge, and we hold our grudge. So we're doing something. We're not just someone to whom things are being done. And it's amazing how quickly you forgive people when you give yourself permission to say, that's grudge-worthy, I'm holding a grudge about that. And it's very important that we think of grudges as being about people rather than against people, because a grudge should never do harm, either to you or to anyone else. Obviously, in crime fiction, a grudge should do harm, because there'd be plot otherwise. But in real life, the grudges I keep, in fact, all my grudges so far, when I think about them, they don't make me feel worse. They make me feel better. They make me feel kind of empowered, because I registered that thing that happened. I acknowledged its importance. If you imagine, say, in your local market square, somebody erected a big statue, a big beautiful statue to commemorate a massacre that had happened there. This sort of thing happens quite often. A terrible thing happens and somebody erects a statue to commemorate it. Now, a visitor to your town wouldn't say, why don't you just not remember that massacre? Just pull the statue down and put a McDonald's there instead. That would be much nicer. We accept that when it's a public or political or historical thing that's been bad, that's happened, that we should commemorate it. I'm suggesting that grudges play that same role, but privately inside our minds. So the other great thing about grudges, before I tell you a couple of my best grudge stories, the other great thing about grudges is, if you start following this way of life that I'm advocating, and I call it the grudge-fold path. I'm sure some of you have heard of the eightfold path. The grudge-fold path involves writing down your grudges, folding them up, and putting them in a special drawer. That's why I wanted to have a fold in there, and that was how I justify it. Once you start following the grudge-fold path, which at the moment I think is only followed by me and one other person who's read the book already, but hopefully it will spread, the advantage is that if someone does something really annoying to you, like it happened to me the other night, 2 nights ago, first night in this hotel, loud pounding music was playing from the 6th floor. And while that was really annoying because I wanted to go to sleep, and I don't think hotels should charge people for rooms that they, in theory, want to sleep in and then make it unable for them to sleep. I mean, I think that's just a passing comment there. But part of me was thinking, this is grudge-worthy. This is fantastic. I've never had a grudge about a hotel before. This is amazing. And then once you're on the grudge-fold path, anything annoying or mean or horrible that anyone does to you, if it's grudge-worthy, you think, oh, is this a new kind of grudge? Is this an old kind? Is this a new category that I've stumbled upon? I mean, it's a bit like when the early chemists were discovering the periodic table, I imagine. And, they thought they only had like gold and hydrogen. I don't know anything about chemistry, so this will all be wrong. And imagine how excited they would have felt when they found some other chemical element. Yes, thank you. So many different types of grudges. Let me tell you one really weird one. You probably all can imagine the basic, obvious one. So there's a betrayal grudge. If someone betrays you, you might have a grudge about that. A hypocrisy grudge. If someone tells you to never smoke cigarettes and then you catch them having a massive smoke behind the bike sheds, hypocrisy grudge. But there are lots of really weird, unusual types, like a misunderstanding of loyalty grudge. I have a misunderstanding of loyalty grudge about a friend of mine who a few years ago decided that he didn't like this guy that we both knew, and he basically rang me up and said that I had to not like this guy too, and I had to cut him off, and if he spoke to me I had to snub him. And I said, but I've got no problem with him. I don't understand even why you don't like him. Why would I be horrible to this guy who I've got nothing against? And my friend said, well, out of loyalty to me. Like, no, that is not loyalty. Loyalty does not mean I have to be vicious to anyone you happen to randomly dislike. So I have a misunderstanding of loyalty grudge about that person. Another weird kind of grudge. Linking person bypass grudge. Linking person bypass grudge. So that is, if I'm invited round to Barbara's house for dinner, and Barbara's an old friend of mine, and while I'm there at her house for dinner, I meet her brother, Peter, who I don't know at all. If I then decide to, without going through Barbara, just to find Peter's number and try and make an arrangement with him as though we're a separate friendship group, without paying tribute to the fact that Barbara is the linking person. Is this making sense to anybody? Yeah. Now, this is a tricky one because technically I'd be doing nothing wrong. Peter and I are free agents. There's no reason why I shouldn't contact him. But Barbara, I think, would be justified in having a massive licking person bypass grudge about me if I did that. Okay, I'm going to end this session by telling you a really one of my favourite grudge stories of my own that's in my top 10. And then I'll leave a couple of minutes in case anyone has a question about how they can start following the grudge fold path immediately. So my funny grudge story, and I love this one. A couple of elderly relatives of mine came round to my house one evening when my husband was away. So it was me, the elderly relatives, and my kids who were in bed. The elderly relatives had rung a taxi to come and collect them to take them home at the end of the evening. And when their mobile phone rang to say, taxi's here, I said, oh, I'll come out with you because I've got some papers in the car that I need to get. I had a very big front garden with a driveway and the car was parked just there on the driveway. So one of the relatives, let's call him John immediately became tense and said, you go and get the papers, we'll wait here. I thought, what's going on? We're all headed outside, you to get into your taxi, me to get my papers, why are you being so weird? That's a question that often runs through my mind when I meet other human beings. Why are you being so weird? So I said, no, we're all going out, let's go. John said, no, it's fine, I'll wait here until you come back in. I said, right, come on, what's going on? What are you worried about? He said, well, I'm worried that while we're all out, us going to our taxi and you going to get the papers from your car, that the front door will close and the kids will be locked in the house on their own. Now, John is a worrier at the best of times, but I was happy to be able to relieve him of this worry. I said, oh, I see. Well, don't worry, John, because my front door is an unusual front door that literally cannot close unless you lock it with an actual key. It's very unusual. Most English front doors, you pull them closed and basically you need a key to get back in. Not my front door. Unless you actually get a key and physically turn a lock, you can open it and get back in any time. So not only did I tell John this, I showed him how the mechanism worked. He still wouldn't go outside. I said, but this is crazy. I've shown you how it's physically impossible for me to get locked out. And even if I'm wrong, which I'm not, but if I am, let's say I got locked out, the kids are asleep in the house. What do you think I'm going to do? Just give up and go to a hotel? Oh, well, I'll just leave the kids trapped in a house on their own and sod off somewhere else. No. What I would do in that situation is wake up a neighbour, get a locksmith. You know, I'm not an idiot. He just wouldn't do it. So in the end, I had to dig my heels in. I said, well, I'm not going to come back into the house, actually. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to stand out there on the driveway until you leave in your taxi. Anyway, he went in a massive strop and started yelling at me and saying, why didn't I care about my children? It was totally bonkers. So in the end, we all went out together and I think he thought he couldn't possibly win. But I noticed that when he got into the taxi, and this was so sinister, the taxi didn't move. In the book, this story is called The Taxi That Didn't Move. And I waited. I got my papers out of the boot of the car really quickly, but I was hovering to see what was going on. The door was wide open. No chance of it closing. And I suddenly noticed that John is staring like this from the window of the taxi, and the window must be slightly open because I hear the taxi driver say to John, so can we go now? And John snapped at the taxi driver, no, we're staying right here till I say so. So in the end, I thought, if I don't go back inside, if he doesn't see me go back inside, he's never going to leave. So I went back inside, I closed the door, taxi went off, and I just felt absolutely enraged. I thought, I've let this neurotic lunatic win. So I went back out of the house and I stood next to my car and I just stood there going, here I am outside my house. I can do this if I want to. The whole thing was completely absurd. But anyway, that is one of the many grudges in my book, How to Hold a Grudge. And we've got 2 minutes left if anyone has a burning question about grudges that they would like to ask. Does anyone have a question? Yes. Oh. Say that again. Sorry.
So if we hold the grudges, they won't just evaporate, right? They will come again and yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So I always say any grudges that you've got, you don't have to keep them forever. There are some grudges which feel no longer useful. If someone is no longer a part of your life at all, then you might not need any grudges about that person. So in fact, that story I've just told you about the taxi and John is sadly dead now, so I don't need to have any grudges about him. I don't need to be protected from him. But actually, I keep that grudge because it reminds me of a bad tendency in me. And that bad tendency in me is that I too readily go along with other people's nonsense. You know, what I should have done in that situation, instead of going and demonstrating lock mechanisms 500 times and, you know, all the nonsense that I did, I should have just said, look, I'm sorry you're worried, but you've got nothing to worry about, and I'm not indulging your neurosis. So I keep the grudge for that reason. But absolutely, if you find a grudge just evaporates naturally, and you don't find it instructive in any way to think about it, then yeah, that is a naturally deceased grudge, and that's fine. Yes?
Hello. So are we trying to learn here that we're not supposed to hold grudges, or is there some instruction in holding a grudge where we teach ourselves some lessons, teach the other person a lesson, and then not hold it in our hearts and minds and then move on? Is that the message we are trying to get here?
So the message I'm trying to give, the main message I'm trying to give is that grudges do not have to have corrosive negative feelings attached to them. Okay. And I think people mistakenly think they do. A lot of people think that holding a grudge means being angry and bitter. So obviously if you see it in that way, you wouldn't want it to last very long, because it's not good for us actually to be angry and bitter for any longer than we have to be. However, we are all going to feel anger. It's just a human emotion and we can't avoid feeling it. What I'm saying is that if we allow ourselves to just remember the story and to have the grudge as a story that we can learn from, then just allowing that to happen and going through that process of turning it into the story, making a list of the lessons you can learn from it, making a list of how you'll behave differently in the future because of it, if we pursue that method, the grudge-fold path, our negative feelings will actually pass much more quickly and we will forgive much more happily and readily. And so I'm saying, absolutely, we should hold grudges, but in the right way. And there are chapters in my book where I say what the wrong way is. There's all kinds of grudge types which are just invalid. Quick example, if somebody called, I'm running out of names. Jeffrey, let's say I'm walking up to my room later on this evening and someone called Jeffrey comes and kicks me in the shin really hard. If I decide to hold a grudge about all people called Jeffrey, based on that incident, that's an illegitimate grudge, because it's only this one Jeffrey that did that thing. You know, I'm not responsible for all the bad behaviour of people called Sophie. I'm only responsible for my behaviour. So that's one kind of invalid grudge. Another kind of invalid grudge is, you know, sometimes you just secretly can't stand someone. They've not done anything wrong, but you just can't stand them. And then they do something minorly annoying, and you say, oh, they've done a terrible thing, and now I'm holding a grudge. It's not really the thing they've done that's making you hold that grudge. It's the fact that you hated them anyway and you were looking for something to get them on. That's an invalid grudge. Inherited grudges, always invalid. You know, we in this family have always hated the Robinsons across the road. And so you, as a member of this family, will also hate all the Robinsons across the road. It sounds crazy, but so many people take on inherited grudges from their families.
Here.
Thank you.
So one question I have. How different is your writing process towards writing fiction versus writing a self-help book in terms of your inspiration, in terms of your writing block or anything that comes in?
Yeah. How different is the process? That's actually really interesting. So I think I'd need to write more non-fiction books to be able to say with great authority how it's different. But certainly for writing this book, it just felt much, much more difficult. And I realised how, I'm so used to making up stories. I know what I'm doing when I make up a story. I think of a good story. I think of how best to tell it. And then I write it. Having to write about my own theory of why everyone should hold grudges in the right way, I was constantly thinking, I don't write about real things. I don't write about my life and say how I really feel about things, but suddenly I was having to do that. So it felt a lot more scary. And I had a lot more of what you might call impostor syndrome. Because when I write novels now, I'm like, yeah, I can write novels. Everyone thinks I should write novels. What I'm supposed to do. Writing a self-help book, I'm not a psychotherapist or a psychologist. I'm just someone who's very, very interested in people and human weirdness. But I kept sort of hearing this voice of authority in my head going, who are you to write a self-help book? And I also kept imagining Eckhart Tolle reading my self-help book and thinking, oh God, is Eckhart going to hate my book? And actually, it's been really interesting being here because in the book tent and also in the gift shop in the hotel, there's loads of positive, enlightenment type self-help books. And the introductions to all of them say things like, Guru so-and-so was full of joy and light, even when he was dying of a hideous disease. And none of them mention how good it is for you to hold grudges. So I'm kind of thinking, oh no, maybe I really am too bitchy for enlightenment. But, I wanted to write a self-help book for people who are normal people. Most of us are not sages and gurus. Most of us can get quite irritable quite quickly, and I think there's a way in which the self-help book industry can make you feel bad about just having normal human emotions. So I wanted to try and counteract that. And I've got contributions in the book from psychotherapists and emotional freedom therapists. So I've got some proper qualified people to back me up. Have we got time? Time for one last
just
question.
One last question, please. Do you think Brexit is a national grudge? Either way.
Excellent question. So I know so many people in the UK who have grudges around Brexit. So there's all the people who don't want Brexit to happen, and they have grudges about the people who voted for Brexit, the politicians who allowed people to vote for Brexit, basically everyone who isn't an active Remainer, as we call it in the UK. But I also know Brexiteers who have got a terrible grudge about anti-Brexit people, and they say, we had a vote and we won and you lost, and by not accepting that, you're going against democracy. So almost everyone has got a Brexit grudge. And actually, I think I must be almost alone in the UK. I don't have any Brexit grudges because that was an issue. When people were thinking, should we, shouldn't we, loads of stuff was being said about the economy and the difficulty of extricating our laws from European laws and the European human right. There's all technical stuff that I know nothing about. So in my choice of what to vote for, I was just relying on other people who I assumed knew more than me. And I've heard good arguments on both sides, and we don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know what the result is going to be if we do Brexit. So I'm quite pleased to say that's an area where I have no grudges. I'm busy with grudges in other areas. But yeah, Brexit in the UK and Trump in the US, those are the two big political grudges. And political grudges are interesting, actually, because I don't know. I understand them less well. I understand personal grudges a lot better because those tend to be personal and professional grudges are the kind that I personally specialise in. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sophie. I think that will be the most entertaining self-help book ever written. And I can't wait to read all what the other 9 grudges are.
And
in that list.
please do listen to the podcast. It's new. And so I don't know how to publicise a podcast, but if you guys listen to it, tell all your friends. You can also, in the review, or if you go to my website, you can send me any funny or interesting grudges you've got, and I will discuss them on the podcast.